My name is Mark Stoddard. I lead the sales and marketing teams here at Client Success, and really excited to have a new guest. First time we've ever done a webinar with Irit Eizips today. And hey, Irit, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Remind me where you're signing in from.
Well, I'm from Silicon Valley, California, and would you like everybody to kind of denote that everybody see the chat?
Nice. Let's see the chat real quick. Let me open up the chat. I've got the Q&A opened, and let me open up the chat.
If the chat's open, guys, feel free to submit questions. And
yeah, dude.
Right now, if you want to connect with one another, put your LinkedIn profile, say who you are, where you're from, say hi to everyone.
Yeah, let's do it.
Toronto, Canada. We got Chicago represented.
I realized a couple of weeks ago on another session, somebody called me out because I asked where everyone was dialing in from, and somebody called me out. Nobody's dialing in anymore. It's all signing.
Dials in.
So if you're dialing in, tell me if you're dialing in the chat thing. I want to know. I'd be fascinated to hear.
We got Pittsburgh.
We got Plano. We got South Africa. We got Kiev.
Florida.
Fort Myers. Robin's asking, what's a dial? Yeah, I'm with you. Clicking in from Minneapolis. What's up, Jeff?
That's awesome.
Nice. Well, awesome.
Finland. My goodness. San Francisco. Woohoo.
We're all over, man. This is good. International posse. So glad to see everyone. We are recording. So if you need to drop early for one reason or another, hope you don't. But if you do, we'll send the recording out afterwards. I'm just glad everyone could join us. Really glad to have Irit on. She is, if you're not familiar with Irit, I'll let her do a little bit more intro on herself, but she's the CEO of CSM Practice. They're a customer success consulting firm. They're going to help CS teams to improve retention, improve customer satisfaction, improve growth. And she's going to talk to us about a topic that I'm particularly interested in. I have a version of this conversation multiple times a week, and I think it's really important in customer success. A lot of folks have started to understand, yep, we need to have customer health scores, but what are the best companies doing? What are the best practices around it? How do we actually create one that works, meaning it actually is predictive of something that's going to happen? It's not just kind of an interesting data point on a dashboard. So we're going to jump into all of that. And Irit's got a ton of data that she can show you. They did a really cool survey of the industry of what other companies are doing. But before we do that, I just want to, there are a lot of, hang on a second. There we go. A lot of you who are not familiar with us, there's a lot of new names on the sign up sheet. And so I just want to make sure that those of you who are not familiar with client success get an understanding of who we are, what we are about. And so maybe I'll just kind of start there. So if you're not familiar with us, here's a slide that talks a little bit about us. And, in addition to what's on the slide about us being a Cody Award winner for the best customer success solution on the market, as well as being recognized, again and again and again as a leader in the customer success category on G2, I'll just leave you with three things about client success. First is that we're the easiest to use, easiest to implement customer success solution that you're going to find. We don't require a dedicated admin, a dedicated resource. We're a streamlined customer success solution that's really focused on getting you the core fundamentals of what you need to build your practice. Over half of those G2 reviews that you see referenced there, they give us marks for how easy we are to use, easy we are to implement. And so that's the first thing I'll leave you with. The second is that we're built for what I'd call emerging success teams. Our customers primarily are, fast growing companies, those ones that are looking to really lay down solid best practices, get a foundation for their customer success. And so whether that's a startup, a scale up, a large company, really focused on emerging not only your technology, but emerging your methodologies, emerging your best practices. And the third part that I'll leave you with is that we are focused on what we would call human first technology or high touch customer success. Most of the customer success solutions that you might see out there might be focused a little bit more on replacing human relationships with automation or with other forms of communication. What we're really built to do is to empower CSM so you can deliver a more impactful, more authentic, human-first experience, and just do that in a more scalable way. So if any of that resonates with you and you'd like to learn more, let me know. You can email me directly. I'm Mark with a K at clientsuccess.com. Sign up for a demo on our website, clientsuccess.com, and look forward to chatting with anybody about it. So let's switch gears from there. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat pane. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you, Miss Irit. 1 second. Let me hit the stop share.
Very
And
cool.
the floor is yours. You have the drive over the slides and the presentation. We're going to make this interactive as we've already had with we started out. So keep your questions coming, keep them in the chat pane or the Q&A. I've got all that pulled up over here. So we'll keep this interactive as we go through. And yeah, let's get started.
Dive in. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We only have 182 people attending today, so I'm super excited to share what I've learned. First of all, in the last, like 7-8 years that I've been doing strategic consulting services for companies. Many a times we took a look at the Healthscore and to find a way to create one that actually works for them. I can't tell you how many times I had a customer success executive come to me and say, well, I don't know why, but this Healthscore doesn't work. So today I'm going to share some of the things that I've learned. We also done an extensive research around customer success health scores just in Q4 2000, and you're welcome to look into some of the results. I'm not going to share too many of those today because you can just look at them online. So I'm just adding this link if you wanted to check it out after the webinar. Not right now, okay? All
no
right.
multitasking. Turn off your
No
Slack, turn off your
multitasking.
Teams, turn off all that. Let's focus.
I will just say that at the bottom of that blog, there's actually a podcast I actually recommend listening, because today I'm just going to focus on the number one question that's on everybody's mind. And can I prevent churn with a customer health score? So I'm going to kind of like clear that a little bit later today. Why should you be listening to me? Those of you who've already heard of me or checked out my YouTube video, you know that I've been doing customer success for a very long time. If you check out my blog, there's a lot of information that just stems from my work with various customer success teams throughout the globe, different sizes of teams. So we learn a lot by just having this plethora of organizations that we've worked with throughout the years to see what works and what doesn't. So really appreciate your time today to listen into some of the lessons learned that I had and my experience through working with so many of you. So thank you so much for your time today. For those of you who after this session think through, hey, we have a health score that doesn't work, we want to implement your framework, feel free to reach out and let's have a conversation as to whether or not me and my team can help you out. All right, so what's on today's agenda? First of all, I want to kind of dig in on like how to prevent churn. What can you do to really dial into forecasting churn more accurately, and then what should be included in the calculation? So just in general, for those of you who don't know, churn in general, how many customers did I have at the beginning of the month? How many did I have at the end or left me? That's just basically the churn. The problem with we don't have any tool to help us prevent, let's say we do have a 5% churn consistently and we think, whoa, we're doing great. If we have a customer if we have another company against you, you're actually doing great against someone that maybe has a 20% churn, because you could see that over time, if all of you acquire like the same amount of customers, because of that churn, the gap between you and your competition is going to be significantly bigger as the years go by. Okay, so that's why it's always important to minimize that gap over time. So really this session is about how preventing this. This is just in case there's just like this new CSM that wants, like a wannabe CSM coming into this. I just wanted to clarify why this is important. So how do we prevent it? So most of you are thinking about preventing it by, looking at different metrics, but at the core of it, we're trying to achieve success for our customers because we know that if we truly achieve success, they will not leave us. That's the premise. So it's really important to get familiar with a formula for customer success. The formula says, if we give the desired outcome, if we are able to deliver the desired outcome with an appropriate experience, and that's something that I learned from Lincoln Murphy. If you haven't read his blogs, you're more than recommended to read all of his blogs and thought leadership. He's absolutely amazing. And so if you take both of these components, you will achieve customer success. And to anybody here in this webinar that is looking at this formula, you want to really ask yourself, is my health score designed to detect whether I am delivering outcomes as well as the appropriate customer experience? I would submit to you that at least half the people that has a health score don't have it set up that way. And so we'll talk a little bit about why this happens. But in today's webinar, I'm going to show you a very simple way where you can start looking at this and really examine, do we have the right components? I'm going to share some examples of things, very simple examples of things that you can add to your formula.
I'm so glad you mentioned just that formula right there,
Yeah.
because I think the majority of the health score models that I see really nail in on customer experience, and they discount customer outcomes. Oftentimes, because it's sometimes just harder to get the customer outcomes. Sometimes you need information back from your customers to do that. But you're spot on that you got to have both in the right kind of makeup in order to really have a model that'll predict retention, growth, and the like.
I totally agree. And I want to give some good news to everybody here on the webinar that they're thinking, I don't know how to measure outcomes for my clients. Maybe I can tell with my high touch clients, but I have no idea how to do that for my low touch. So I'm going to share some of the, how do we measure that for low touch as well? So stay tuned and hold me accountable for that, okay?
Yeah, Marcus even just hopped into the chat pane. He says, hard to get customer outcomes when you don't capture them on the front end. So yeah, so there's a bunch on this. So yeah, we're gonna dig in.
Yeah, that's the general assumption. How can I tell? How do I know? Yeah, okay. So I'll share a little bit of what other companies are doing, but essentially creating a customer success is a seesaw between creating a balance, right? Between value and relationship. And I'll explain why that is so important. And the reason we think about it as value as relationship is that it's part of the formula. Value is customer outcomes and relationship is customer experience. So if we can dial in and kind of think about how can we score value and how can we score the relationship in a way that we can even potentially automate it, wouldn't that be lovely? And if we did, what would happen? So we need a customer health score and we need to forecast renewals, right? And really say that the health score is an indication of renewals, yes or no. So, and to reduce churn, the health score should provide us with an indication of what is the strength of the relationship? Is it a significant, valuable relationship to the client? And then the other aspect is, what is the level of value that the customer is deriving from that relationship? And why is that important? Here's how this is being impacted. Obviously, if they get maximum outcomes and the most appropriate experience, as Lincoln Murphy says, of course, they're not going to renew, but they're also going to grow and become great advocates for us. You will see from this quadrant that unfortunately, the number of customers that fall into this bracket is typically smaller than everybody else. So it is our job as CSMs to continuously drive as many people to go into this bracket. Unfortunately, though, if we provide awesome relationships and they still don't get maximum value or high value, just a preliminary value, think about year one, they might be at risk of churn, but they will give us notice. So let's say they're looking for a certain feature or a certain capability. They can't find it. They don't think you can. They will at least let you know, hey, is this something you can add to your roadmap? or they will let you know that we don't understand how to do this. Can you show us how? But they will be still engaged with you. And so you will minimize churn quite a bit with this one. Unfortunately, if you have a very weak relationship, you are likely to lose it to a customer without notice or have them completely churn. So our jobs as CSMs is to move them to these brackets as best we can. And then the health score is really designed to say, what bracket will they fall? And can I move as many of them to this half of the quadrant so I can control the churn rate as much as possible?
That's oftentimes helpful because, even like sometimes that notice is really long term. Like I've seen in cases where somebody says, you have this now we're in a 12-month, a 24-month contract. If I'm going to renew at the end of that, you need to have this. And that gives you, in some cases, a long time to actually, build the thing that you need in order to have that. So that is a key place to start if you're not there yet.
100%. I think everybody on the call has some notion around how to create awesome relationships with the high touch. But I would submit to you that if you start tracking and really think about, do you really have awesome relationships? So we'll do a little bit more definition of what awesome relationship really means and how can we track it for low touch as well as high touch. Because I think some of the people in the webinar that are CSMs are thinking, yeah, I have an awesome relationship with my customer. But sometimes, what they think is an awesome relationship is a limited relationship. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that just to clarify what that really means. And the reason this is important is that there was a recent research that was published about customer, in January 2021 in a blog called Customer Churn, 12 ways to whatever. Basically, they said that in B2B organization, they're successfully able to reduce the churn and by identifying at-risk customers early. And this is really what this probability quadrant is going to tell you. How probable are they to renew with you? And so anybody that's on the bracket that they might not renew and that you can move towards by awesome relationship, move towards a less likelihood to renew, that's really the goal with this health score. So how to calculate the health score to meet this formula for customer success? So first of all, those of you who don't have a health score, I just wanted to share what a health score dashboard looks like. Mark, maybe you can kind of like talk about what the approach of client success is, because this is a dashboard that actually comes from client success software.
Yeah, glad you bring it up. So I mean, the way we think about kind of your health score model is, everyone is going to have their own kind of unique inputs that should lead into a health score. And so some of those inputs are going to be, a lot of those things that you already talked about on your previous slide. And the way we think about it is we want to give you the ability to not just take in quantitative inputs like usage or, feedback via NPS or, things like that. We also want to give you some qualitative inputs like, how long has it been since you actually engaged with them? Like if you have a strategic high touch customer and you haven't talked to them in a couple months, that should be an impact on the health score. And in addition to having kind of that side of the health score, you also want to make sure you have kind of like a CSM driven CSM sentiment to the health score of, if I'm working with this customer and the quality or the quantitative side of the conversation is going very well, usage is looking good, NPS is looking good, but I just went into my last EBR and our executive sponsor is leaving and is being replaced by somebody that works for our competitor. I should also have the ability to update the health score with that type of qualitative information. So a lot more that we can go into it, but hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, well, what's really nice is that you can add different perspectives that either denote the quality of the relationship. This is what QOR stand for. as well as an ROI.
Mhm.
Sentiment as an ROI, I want to like double click on what the ROI could be. I think you could expand on the sentiment here. And so
Sure.
I'm going to give you some examples of how you can really score the ROI with customers, even if you don't know, based on usage, whether they got the ROI or not.
Sure.
And then what's really nice is that you could see how it's being calculated overall, see how your entire install base and how do you trend over time. If you're an executive and you're in this webinar, this is extremely important because you want to see where do you need to add additional plays, additional templates, and dial in on the conversation. Do you need to improve the relationship and how you guys are doing managing relationships within those accounts, or do you need to actually dial in on providing more value to customers so that you can really see what's going on? So I'm going to share some best practices on how to take this example and amplify it inside a Healthscore. And Mark, I'm not surprised that this is like the example we've seen. Most companies are looking to use whatever data they have in place. So usage, engagement, maybe even level of relationship to some degree is really easy to get and automate. And so those who responded to our survey a while back, these are the predominant metrics that we're seeing right now. The reason that the Healthscore doesn't work is because they're more likely to use those than an ROI. In other words, your Healthscore, if this is how it looks like, it's imbalanced. Remember, it's a seesaw, 50-50. And it's actually a multiplication, not relationship plus experience. Not experience plus outcomes. It actually needs to be very well balanced. And so if I don't really track how much value they're getting out of the relationship, then my Healthscore is not going to work.
Now, let's say, somebody's starting from scratch. I think you see the usage, the engagement, and the relationship, and maybe survey scores. You made the comment a minute ago that most people start there because that's what they've got. Like,
right.
What are your thoughts on, like, does starting with that, I mean, is that still 2 or 3 steps down the road? Does that get you 50-60% of the way to where you need to get to? Or is it, well, you really don't have any type of prediction until you get all these metrics? Like, what are your thoughts on, maybe it's more kind of like a rollout question?
Look, it's really about, if you only have these 3, let's say, or these 2 in your Healthscore cannot answer the question, what is the probability they're going to renew? Call it as it is. I don't have it balanced. I can't predict it because it's not balanced. But what is this useful for? It's useful in answering a different question. It's useful to answer, is my client fully adopting the application, my software, in a manner that's sticky, sticky and differentiating features are actually being used?
That makes sense.
Are they highly engaged with me? Yes or no? Some people actually have a very hard time to calculate engagement outside the product because they heavily rely on usage data. So even that is really just engagement within the product, breadth versus, depth of use versus frequency of use. So let's call it like it is. I'm really checking in on the health of the adoption. And it tells me, to what degree is this customer aligned with best-in-class customers around product adoption. But we know, if I go back to that quadrant, if they really use my product a lot, does it mean that I'm addressing all their key use cases? What if their business changes a lot and whatever they used before is now being commoditized because they have other business needs? They don't have the relationship with me, so they're not even telling me. They think my solution is very basic. They're going to start fishing for another company. How many of us seen high usage engagement with a product, and before we know it, they're out the door, going to a competitor that they think has more value?
Or a global pandemic happens and it turns their entire business on its head, and then all of a sudden the value that they're deriving completely shifts.
Exactly. So just tracking usage does not track churn. It just tracks, did we do this adoption really well, which granted is a very important component, because if they buy it and don't use it, we know or not using it enough, or not using it the frequency that we recommend, then we know that there's a risk. So can we mitigate for that? But it's not a wholesome solution. So I just wanted to call this out because some people don't have really understand why it doesn't work. It doesn't work in answering that specific question, but it works in answering other questions.
Makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I was even talking to an executive the other day, and it was similar to kind of what you had mentioned earlier, where they had actually hired a data science team to come in and do a 3-month analysis of kind of their customer base. And their analysis was heavily weighted on the top 3 things that you have there: usage, engagement, relationship. Mm-hmm. And what they found was that the model that they built was highly indicative of customer satisfaction, highly indicative of how they felt about us, but it had very little correlation to what actually retained. They had customers who, quote unquote, might be dissatisfied, but had really high retention and growth, and vice versa. Customers that they thought were their best friends that absolutely loved them, but that would churn on them with no notice. And so I'm glad you mentioned that part.
Yep. And if you go to my the blog that I've shared before, I highly recommend. There's a podcast there where I just share, best practices on how to build a customer health score that can help you drive customers to becoming best in class. And so it's a much more balanced customer health score, but I'm going to touch on some of these elements today, so no worries. Okay, we talked about it, relationship and value. If you have a low touch model, this is a beginning of what the components of the relationships score could look like. So at the very rudimentary level, you want to say, are they opening my emails? Are they responding to them quickly? Or does it take some time to respond? Same thing with events. Do they even click on event invitations, or do they open them, or do they even retweet about it on LinkedIn and Twitter? Do they ask us for meetings? Like when they do a support ticket, or
are we always chasing them?
Are we always chasing them? Or do they actually request for meetings? Now, in addition to that, for high touch models, you can always say, who has the relationship? I think that's a gap that a lot of CSM teams have. They just look at what the CSM relationship is. And we usually as CSMs have the relationship with the technical admin, the business lead, but we don't have the relationship necessarily with the executive lead, and sometimes not even the business champion. And so what is the ideal scenario for high touch clients for your company? What kind of relationships do you need? I had some companies that are so complex that they actually need to have and establish a relationship with the procurement manager. So at least one annual touch point per year, or when things are at risk, or we don't think that they're getting enough value, have that touch point with them. Who owns that relationship? Is it really the CSM? Do we need other people within our company to make sure are managing that relationship with all sorts of resources and stakeholders within the client? Do we have that mapped out? So first and foremost, are you keeping track of all the types of relationships that you can have? And second of all, if you have that relationship, how strong is it? Is it a weak relationship? Like if you call, do they know you by name? Are you friends with them from high school? Like, is it a really, committed relationship? How well do you know that? So that gives us an indication of when things go wrong, or we feel like they're good for an expansion. Those are the contact people that we're good, like the ones with the awesome, truly awesome relationship. Like this is awesome at the CSM level, but do we have it awesome all the way, the depth and breadth of relationships that we need within the company? So if you're—
Stay tuned for my blog post on why you should sell to all your high school friends. So
yes,
that's my next blog post.
There you go. Because of that, right? Hey, listen, so if you're on this webinar, what I want you to do is first and foremost, have a team meeting and whiteboard. If for low touch customers or high touch customers, what are the meaningful touch points you want to have? And what does it look like from none to awesome, so that you have a relationship with an intent? Then I want you to figure out what are the types of, which are the personas within your client base within each account that you need to have. Is it the VP of sales, the VP of marketing? Is it the procurement officer? Who else are you dealing with that you need to have a good relationship with? And then who in your organization should own that? It's not always the customer success manager. And then have sort of like a scaled approach of how awesome the relationship is in terms of personal level of connection. I would really like to recommend, Mark, I believe that you had a full webinar on that with Ziv Pellet from AppsFlyer.
Sure, yeah.
So if you wanted to add that link in the chat, I really recommend after this webinar, double clicking on this and really see he has a very data-driven approach, and he manages this relationship score on his, on this, well, video, I suppose. I really recommend everybody to get familiar with this. This is just a taste of what it would be, just a very rudimentary level. Baseline, you want to kind of define what the score is and then give it like, what's the maximum score? Think about like a maturity score for relationships. What would be the max? So in this case, very simple example, it's 15. All right, this is the stuff that everybody hears like, okay, so how do I, manage for value? So this example is actually from SAP, who drives for a high touch model. They actually charge a fee for their customer success program. So if you want to have an assigned CSM, you actually pay for that service. And so to make sure that every account, very high touch accounts, drive for value. Look at this. This is not just about have we realized goals and gotten value from the solution. That I think that's the basic mistake or misconception that most people have. That value is really how much value am I getting from the solution? They expanded that notion, Mark. And they said, well, yeah, we want to make sure that we have personalized plans to achieve business goals. Why did they add that step here? A lot of times we're having some issues in getting the customer in the room to create that success plan. So by having a customer value score that they socialize back to the customer, they can drive customer accountability to getting maximum value. So they broke this down to sort of say, what are the things that we need the customer to participate in to help them get maximum value? And if they score low, we can have a discussion about that with the decision makers. Then they're saying, yeah, you know what? It's great to have a plan, but also a success plan and drive towards it. But we also need to look at adoption and consumption. That's the breadth and depth of product usage that all of you, a lot of people are actually tracking. But then they're also saying, look, a lot of customers are deciding to work with specific software companies because they're the best in the industry. They're considered to be the leading thought, the thought leader essentially in the space. They have great methodologies. They know what they're doing. We want to learn from them. And so once they sign up, though, sometimes they forget.
Sure.
They get so ingrained about enabling this module and using that feature that they forget that we actually enable them all these different things for them to get the value. Remember how I said that we can get value to low touch customers? I just recorded another video for my YouTube channel. You know how I love doing these, these conversations with other executives on my YouTube video. And so I interviewed the VP of customer success at Pipedrive. And he said, because he has 100,000 customers. And I was like, all right, like, how do you know that you got them?
And he knows them all by first name and went to high school.
Exactly, right? That's what he does. No, so he actually said, look, we get the most retention from this SMB customer cohort by making sure that they have access to all these methodologies. If we can, in partnership with them, not just have them use the solution, but actually create, Pipedrive is a CRM application. So it's really first and foremost designed for salespeople, and then they have other modules, of course. But if we can help those smaller companies have better sales processes, have better sales methodologies, we win. And so our question is, are they leveraging all the knowledge and methodologies that we actually provide them? So they have very good ways of, highlighting and tracking, are they consuming the methodologies? Are they getting value? So I would submit to you that I would actually recommend taking a look and making a list of how do we teach customers to become better at what they do, the business methodologies, and then keep track of that as an indication of value received by the customer if you have a very low touch model.
And that will impact not only your customer success, but that to me starts to create this flywheel that not only helps you drive better retention and growth, but helps you to pull more new customers in the top of your funnel. If you have a strong opinion that you can go out to the world and say, here's how we think you should do X. If I'm Pipedrive, I should have a very firm opinion on here's the way the world of sales should operate. If I'm client success, I have opinion on here's the way that customer success teams should operate. And I build all my thought leadership, my awareness, my methodologies around that. Oftentimes people will come to you and they'll say, we totally buy into your methodology. We totally buy into your opinion on the way this thing should operate. Show me your solution, show me your software, because I hope it aligns up with kind of your view on the world. That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention on this is what I love about this, and this is something that I've been trying to figure out, how do we get rid of in the CS world, which is the check-in. Every CSM, tell me if your CSMs do check-ins. We haven't talked for a month. I'm just trying to check in. I'm trying to kill the check-in because it doesn't drive business value. And what something like this, if you have a model like what we're looking at here, all of a sudden I can reach out and I can say, okay, this customer is yellow in these areas, red in these areas. All of a sudden now I have something that's really impactful that I can reach out and try to drive value, drive adoption of. And instead of just saying, hey, I'm calling because we haven't talked in a minute, I wanted to check in. It's, hey, I noticed you guys haven't consumed this part of our methodology. Your team isn't certified in this part. Turns out that our customers who do X are, a lot more successful. Should we arrange a call to talk about that? That avoids the check-in, and now I'm driving value with it. So I pulled this off on a little bit of a different direction, but that's something I want to make sure that we said.
Very valuable what you said, and I think that you're exactly right. We're thinking, we're going to build a health score, so it will help us forecast the renewals or identify churn risks, but that's a very reactive way of thinking. What if we could build out a health score that can help the CSM decide what would be the next touch point and really create significant relationships, which is the whole reason I created that podcast a few years ago. So I highly recommend listening to it. If you want to hear Chris Wider, if you want to hear Chris actually go through this entire model, please go to this YouTube link here so that you can hear exactly what his thoughts were and how to actually deliver customer success scoring model and how did he develop it and this thought process around that. So I have the wrong last name. It should be Chris Singh, my bad. All right, so once you've built a way to create how are you going to score value for customers, whether they're low touch or high touch, and how to build a score for a relationship, what you want to do is kind of say, all right, how do I think about it? So, and again, this is all coming from, Ben Wynn was on your CS100, I think it was 2018, right? Again, there's a YouTube video on the client success channel where Ben goes through his entire approach for predicting customer churn risk. Highly recommend listening to that. But this is taking it from there and just saying, okay, if now we know how to score for value and score for relationships in a very detailed manner, I can actually predict who's going to renew, who's might have a churn risk, but they will let us know. So I'm less concerned about that, but I can actually work with them. But who are the ones that will likely to lose to a competitor? And who are the ones that will, if they were to churn, they will churn with no notice. So I can align my plays based on the quadrant to either strengthen the relationship or prove more value?
Go deeper on those plays. So what do you mean when you say align my plays? Like, if somebody's in quadrant X, what are maybe one or two examples of a play that you would implement, maybe like a high touch and a low touch example of how you might go from bottom left to top right, or bottom left to top left, or bottom left to bottom right?
Yeah, so I'll get to exactly. So that's a good segue for the next slides. So first of all, if they fall into a high risk, whether it's a competitor or not, what I want to know next is why are they at a high risk? And I really like how at client success, you can actually separate severe risk versus just health in general, okay? So if they fall on a severe risk of churn, I want you to then have your team sit down and say, what are the triggers for high risk? And then have specific plays based on the trigger. Because it's not just about there's a severe risk. I want to know why. So in this, I don't want you to include anything that might, give them some risk. This should only be risks, triggers that potentially drive a customer at a 75% chance to absolutely churn. These are some examples. And so, for example, if key features are not used, but you have the relationship, you can then work with them on a success plan to start having them understand why they should, what's the use case, why should they be using them, and drive for a success plan to have them start using those features. Same thing for sticky features, or let's say there's a lot of outages. Maybe there's a call with the product team to kind of see what we can do about this, what might be causing them, a health check. Maybe there's too many support tickets. It could be that the executive team, the high-level executive sponsor left. So there could be different things here that you would have a play for. But in general, I want to say, if you were to actually maximize value from doing a health score properly, you want to have very specific plays attached, not just for when they're red, which is our win back strategies. And we give them a discount, where we extend the contract so we can get them to use the product. Maybe we build a success plan like I suggested. But also if they're yellow, it means that either they have too low of an ROI or too low or too weak of a relationship. And so what am I going to do about it? An example would be, we have the relationship with a technical admin, but we don't have a relationship with the executive sponsor. They're not at risk. It's just in yellow, but they're certainly not best in class. What are we going to do about that? Or, right, maybe they got one use case, but they're not leveraging all of our methodologies. They're not coming to our webinars about methodologies. So they're not really seeing us as a thought leader. They don't really respect our opinions in this industry. We need to fix that. And then of course, if they're green, that's great. We have strong relationships. We have a strong ROI. Let's get them to speak at a webinar. Let's get them to speak at our conferences. Ask them to submit a review on G2 Crowd, whatever the next step might be. Let's leverage
turn them
that
into
as
some type of advocate. How do I raise their profile? Because that
Correct.
makes more a part of that flywheel that's going to continue to grow my business.
Correct. So hopefully that answers your question around Playbooks, because you can certainly do that even with the low touch customers.
Sure.
But it doesn't end with that. This is a CSM Practice holistic framework for health scores. So you can design your health score well, but if you don't have the plays, well plan, how to get well plan templates, or, win back strategy templates, a code red process. So let's say we have a CSM play on what to do when a certain risk trigger is fired off. They don't know what to do about it. Or, if that doesn't work, how do they escalate? When do they escalate? What's the right channel? Who should be intervening? So you can see there's like a plethora of things that could be involved or interlaced with a health score strategy that I would highly recommend considering. And if this looks overwhelming, or you're not sure what one of these is, and you want to, of course, work with my firm to establish this holistic framework, we'd be more than happy to really go through each one of these components and build this out for any of the teams that are listening today.
Sure.
Just wanted to hone in, all of this is really to help us identify and forecast a lot more accurately. There's some additional steps that you can take to even further crystallize the forecasting and make it more accurate. But remember how we took a look and there were like some people that might have a portion of that health score already identified. I want to say, look, it might be a health score to help you increase solution adoption if you don't have all the metrics. So as homework after this webinar, I want you to really take a look at your health score and say, stop saying that this health score is going to help me decide whether the customer is healthy or not. That's just so vague. Say it like it is. This health score is going to help me understand whether the adoption is healthy or not. Or is it my expansion, opportunities healthy or not? Or am I being enough proactive enough? Or am I really designing a health score to help me move all my customers to best in class, to help the CSM know what the next steps are? I think too many of us are on, hey, I'm going to create a health score and it's going to tell me whether the client is going to renew or not. That's almost impossible with any health score because, it can't always predict it at 100% level of probability. It can just indicate what are the areas that you need to work on to get to a higher level of probability of renewal. Just going to finish with some more resources. I know I already shared a few. Sorry about that. Okay, so first of all, relationship score. If you want to learn more about that, we also interviewed Ziv Peled. This is a little different than the video that Client Success has on their website. Here, I actually am forcing Ziv Peled to show us how is he tracking that on Salesforce. So that's really the focus on this video. And by that, he's also showcasing the framework, but I actually recommend watching both videos. And this is the video I was referring to with Chris Singh. If you wanted to watch that, both of them are available on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go do that after this webinar. You'll learn a lot and you'll also be notified on any new videos that I'm posting. I really appreciate all of your support. Heart.
Awesome.
Yeah, and these are some additional ones. So after this webinar, we're going to share the stack, and you can click and watch more stuff.
Perfect.
Yep, that's it.
Cool. No, that's great. This is fantastic. We got some questions. You okay to take a few questions? So let me jump in here. It looks like I inadvertently touched a nerve with my no check-in comment. Maybe I'll do a maybe I'll do a separate session on the check-ins. But there are a bunch of questions here related to kind of the model itself. I think Christian asked a question. Back when you were looking at at the SAP model, a lot of different inputs. So there were a few people that asked this question, which was like, so the score, let's see, yeah, this one here. So he says, the score value seems like a full scorecard on its own. I mean, it's 20 measures. It's got 3 different scores. It's got each of its own measures. Isn't some of the data getting lost by measuring so many different measures? Maybe, 20 measures are only 20% of the health score. So but more just kind of like, is this, what are your thoughts on like, should everyone have this many inputs and this type of a model, or is this just an example that works for a really large strategic customer, like what obviously SAP would be working toward? What are your thoughts there?
Well, first of all, this is not a holistic score, because where's the relationship?
Good point.
They call it customer experience, but it's really designed to say, okay, do they give us feedback? Are we considered a trusted advisor? But it doesn't really tell us what is the level of the relationship, because it's a customer facing value score. It doesn't tell us, are they engaged? Because we're not going to show that to a customer. It doesn't tell us what's the level of the relationship. Do we know them personally or not? And it doesn't tell us the frequency of the relationship. Are they engaged with our emails and whatnot on a regular basis, or is there a really big delay? And so I don't think this is a holistic score. With regards to how many components are there, yes, is it going to be diluted? Yes, but only, does it matter? Depends on why you're building the score. If the score is, in this case, the score is designed, and I want you to really listen carefully here. The score is designed to drive customer accountability to maximizing value with you. Whether you share it digitally or not doesn't matter. So does it matter if I have a lot of components here? I just want to tell the customer, hey, listen, we have 20 points, right, of getting value, and you're only using 15. So you're only 15 out of 20 maximizing the value that we can give you because you're not working with us on personalizing plans to achieve business goals. This is what this score is really about. So I'm not too concerned about having too many metrics. And this is just the value score. If I were to design a health score that if it's an 8, like the overall score, if it's an 8, that means that they're absolutely going to renew. And if it's a 1, they're absolutely, like if it's supposed to forecast my churn, you will never get it right, whether you have 2 components or 1, unless you have a very high touch model and your CSMs are almost like in a daily touch with your customer, have a great relationship, and they can really forecast accurately. If you have a low touch model, it's going to be very hard to say, well, can we forecast whether or not they're going to churn for sure or renew for sure? We can only say that, high level probability they're not going to churn if this is what is happening. And even here, the executive decision maker might leave, a new one would come back, and they're regularly working with your vendor competitor, and it's going to be hard to sell them on continuing working with you because they already have a good relationship with this other vendor. Still going to have some risk. So I'm not really hung up on the number of metrics so long as you're not using it as an indicator to forecast your churn, but rather as an indicator of what should the next step be. Should we work on relationships, or should we work on value, or are we actually in a good place? I would say if the executive decision maker left, then your relationship score is going to be hurt, because if you design this appropriately, you now have a none or weak relationship with the executive decision maker. That's a big risk. So you can play with weights to say, how much weight do I give the relationship with the executive? I didn't put it on the slide here, but it should come in. And so if it's a none, you can call it out as one of the risk signals. The risk signal is the best indicator for churn or not, because it would only include things that at a very high level of risk will actually cause the customer to churn. That's different than a health score. The health score should be designed to say, are they best in class, getting maximum value and getting awesome relationship with us?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's oftentimes thinking of the health score in the wrong way. It's a statistical model. It says, it's like when, the meteorologist is forecasting the weather for tomorrow. When they say there's a 70% chance of rain tomorrow, simply what that means is when conditions look exactly like this, 70% of the time, it ends up raining tomorrow. That means there's 30% of the time it won't rain. And just because it was a 75, 80, even 90% chance of rain, if it doesn't end up raining, does that mean we should throw the entire model out?
Right.
Well, I would argue no, because it still is right 9 times out of 10. And the whole idea for me this entire idea around a customer health score is you're trying to give yourself a directional model. You're trying to give yourself, to use your term, the playbook that says, okay, if they're at 75%, what are the 3 things I can do to get them to 85, 90, 100%? And you're constantly iterating. You're constantly trying to sort through what are the things that I need to adjust to try to improve them. But that's my thought on that. What were you going to say?
So it's not okay for the 75. What do I need to do? If it's 75, like you're here, you want to double click and say, why are they 75? That's the first question you want to ask. So if you don't build it to this level of degree of granularity, how are you going to know why are you scoring low on the relationship? You need to look at why is this happening, and then so I kind of want to encourage everyone to do a detailed relationship score and a detailed value score. So when your CSMs see a customer either here or here, they can double click, understand the why, and start working towards improving that, granular level. So it's a bottoms up approach. If they don't know why they score lower, they can just guess. Like, we don't want to have a playbook on this. We want to have a playbook for each one of the components so that we can have a more consistent way to drive customers to best in class towards an awesome relationship or a maximum value. I think that's really the baseline of what the mistake is that we get a score and say, well, let's drive into green, but we don't know why, because we haven't really defined it. We haven't taken the moment to say, what is value for low touch? What is value for high touch? What does a really good relationship look like? Do we have all the relationships? I will submit to you that most companies are not very diligent about it because they have never maybe watched this webinar. But hopefully after today, everybody just needs to scratch their head and say, hey, do I really have it outlined the way that, is designed? It's supposed to be designed so we can have a more proactive, diligent approach towards moving everyone into this bracket.
Got it. No, that makes total sense. I wish we had another hour because we have enough questions to fill up the rest of at least my afternoon. I know we're right up on time, or at least we have a couple minutes left. Instead of trying to hammer in a few more questions, maybe just, what is the last piece of advice you'd like to share? What is the last, things you'd like to leave with folks before we wrap up? And I'm going to log all the questions, and maybe we'll try to answer as many as we can in a follow-up, blog post or something. But, just, any last things that you want to share with the group here. Really appreciate you spending the time and going through your presentation and sharing all your research. But yeah, any last things you'd like to share?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to attend today. I know you have busy schedules. Check out my YouTube channel. There's a ton of videos about health scores. Check out the blog that I shared to learn more about the research we've done. There's a lot of different suggestions and outcomes there so that you can avoid making some of the mistakes that other companies have already made and see what works for other companies too. And then lastly, really go do whiteboard with your teams. Take a look at what you have, compare it against some of the thought leadership I shared today. Where are your gaps? And then if you can start defining a better score, that's really great. And then think about this entire framework. Do you really have that? What else do you need to get maximum value out of your health score? And if you really get stuck, as usual, you can come to me. Let's do a project together. Love to have more clients, but I really appreciate your time to just listen in and see if this resonated with you.
Awesome. Fantastic. Really appreciate not only you taking the time, but for everybody on the call. And again, apologies, we can't get to everybody's question. We'll try as best we can to do a follow-up and to get to everything, but fantastic discussion. I learned a ton, and hopefully you guys all learned something as well. And again, just really appreciate everyone taking the time, and we will leave it there. We're going to send out the recording and links to all these resources afterwards. So keep an eye on your inbox. Probably won't get through until probably tomorrow morning, my time, Mountain Time. So, but we'll send everything across, and looking forward to continuing to chat with anyone. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.